I've been to the Mountaintop by Dr. Martin Luther King. And before I deliver Dr. King's speeches, I think it is vitally important to give the context and the background and backdrop of the final days leading up to this speech and the final days leading up to his death. He died a little bit over 24 hours after delivering this speech. It was in February of 1968 that sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee became extremely fed up. They were fed up, they were frustrated, they were angry, they were upset for two reasons. One, they were fed up because they were receiving 40 cents an hour for the work they had performed. That wasn't minimum wage then, and it sure wasn't a living wage. 40 cents an hour. They were fed up. The second reason they were fed up was because not only were they underpaid, but they were working in extremely hazardous and dangerous working conditions. So they were going to stage a protest. They were going to demonstrate, and they were going to march through the streets of Memphis, Tennessee. They wanted it to be big. So they knew that they had to get the support of the civil rights community. And so on March the 18th, 1968, they called Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the most prominent civil rights leader of that time, and said, Dr. King, we're going to stage a march and a protest through the streets of Memphis, Tennessee, and we need your help. We need you to come to Memphis, Tennessee, and support us as we demonstrate to elected officials and those in our city our frustration. Dr. King agreed with one condition. He said, I'll come to Memphis, Tennessee, if you can promise me that it will be nonviolent. Nonviolent. They agreed on both ends. It would be a nonviolent protest through the streets of Memphis, Tennessee. So Dr. King flew into Memphis, Tennessee on March the 28th, 1968, for that protest and demonstration. They marched through the streets of Memphis, but unfortunately, it was not nonviolent. There were clashes between those who were participating in the protest and the police. Dr. King was extremely disappointed. He was frustrated. He was angry. He was angry because they had planned to take this march to Washington, D.C. in the summer of 1968. And so Dr. King said, if we're going to take this march to Washington, D.C. in this summer, we have got to have a successful, peaceful protest here in Memphis, Tennessee first. So he said, we've got to do it again. So Dr. King flies home and flies back to Memphis, Tennessee on April the 3rd, 1968. April 3rd, 1968, Dr. King gets into Memphis, Tennessee, and as you can imagine, he is tired. Most people don't know this. Dr. King is also sick. He had a cold and some issues with his throat, and so he told his friends, he had Reverend Ralph Abernathy and Reverend Jesse Jackson with him. He said, I'm not going to Mason Temple tonight for the event. I'm going to stay here and get some rest. So they went on to Mason Temple. Reverend Ralph Abernathy was on to speak. Ralph Abernathy gets to Mason Temple. He sees the crowd. It is packed from the front to the back. The balcony is packed. And Reverend Ralph Abernathy picked up the phone, called the Lorraine Motel, transferred me to room 302. They transferred him to the room. He said, Dr. King, I got enough wisdom to know they did not come to see me. You have got to get to Mason Temple tonight. Dr. King, tired and sick, he agreed to come to Mason Temple, and he delivered the speech I'm going to do for you today. No, he was not even slated to speak. He wasn't on the program to speak, and he did the I've Been to the Mountaintop speech. I'm going to note two things that Reverend Ralph Abernathy and Reverend Jesse Jackson mentioned in the aftermath. They said, this was the first time we saw Dr. King speak and be distracted. Never in the history of Dr. King speaking had he ever been distracted. Nothing could distract Dr. King. He was just an excellent orator. It was storming that day, and you all know back in the day, our sanctuary chapel had those stained glass windows, and so you could see when it was lightning and thundering outside. And when the lightning would flash, Dr. King his attention would go to the windows. He said the first time they saw Dr. King distracted. And Reverend Jesse Jackson noted that this was the first time after Dr. King spoke that he was extremely tired. He was extremely tired, and he noted that after the speech, he had to help Dr. King to his seat. His first time. So that was April the 3rd, 1968. April the 4th, 1968. The plan was they would go to the house of Reverend Billy Kyles to eat dinner before an event that was scheduled that night. So they leave Dr. King's room standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. It's Reverend Jesse Jackson and a musician from Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. King stops them as they're walking. He said, "Jesse, where's your tie at? You know we're supposed to be going to eat at Reverend Billy Kyle's house. You know you're supposed to have a tie on. Where your tie at?" Reverend Jesse Jackson said, "I thought all I needed was an appetite. I didn't think I needed to bring a tie." Dr. King said, "Man, you're crazy." He looked at the musician that was standing with him. He said, "Will you play my favorite song tonight?" If you don't know, Dr. King's favorite song was "Precious Lord." Take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I'm tired, I'm weak, I'm worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Precious Lord, take my hand and lead me home. So that was the request Dr. King had for that young man, that musician. The musician agreed. Reverend Jesse Jackson said, "Dr. King." Dr. King said yes, and in a moment's time, gunshot rang from across the Lorraine Motel parking lot, killing Dr. King. Dr. King's final request was that his favorite song be played. And before I deliver Dr. King's final speech, I would like my Father all the way from heaven's gates in that greater cloud of witnesses to sing for us one verse of Dr. King's favorite song.
Take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I get tired. You know, I get weak. I'm old. Hallelujah. But through the storm, through the night, lead me. You're the only one who can lead me on to the light. Oh, take my hand, precious Lord, and lead your child on home.
I've been to the Mountaintop by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You know, several years ago, I was in New York City autographing the first book that I'd written. While sitting there autographing books, a demented black woman came up. And the only question that I heard from her was, "Are you Martin Luther King?" Now, I was looking down writing, and I said, "Yes." And the next minute, I felt something beating on my chest. Before I knew it, I had been stabbed by this demented woman. I was rushed to Harlem Hospital. It was a dark Saturday afternoon. That blade had gone through. The x-rays revealed that the tip of the blade was on the edge of my aorta, the main artery, and once that's punctured, you're drowned in your own blood. That's the end of you. It came out in the New York Times the next morning that if I had merely sneezed, that I would have died. Well, about 4 days later, they allowed me, after the operation, after my chest had been opened and the blade had been taken out, to move around in the wheelchair in the hospital. They allowed me to read some of the mail that came in, and from all over the states and the world, kind letters came in. I read a few, but one of them I'll never forget. I'd received one from the president and the vice president. Oh, but I've forgotten what those telegrams said. I'd received a visit and a letter from the governor of New York, but I've forgotten what that letter said. Oh, but there was another letter that came from a little girl, a young girl who was a student at the White Plains High School. Oh, and I looked at that letter, and I'll never forget it. It said simply, "Dear Dr. King, I am a 9th grade student at the White Plains High School." She said, "While it should not matter, I would like to mention that I'm a white girl." She said, "I read in the people of your misfortune and of your suffering, and I read that if you had sneezed, that you would have died. And so," she said, "and so I'm simply writing you to say that I'm just so happy that you didn't sneeze." Oh, and I want to say tonight, that I too am happy that I didn't sneeze. Oh, because if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1960 when students all over the South started sitting in at lunch counters. And I knew that as they were sitting in, they were really standing up for the best in the American dream and taking the whole nation back to those great wells of democracy, which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1961 when we decided to take a ride for freedom and ended segregation in interstate travel. If I'd sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1962 when Negroes in Albany, Georgia decided to straighten their backs up. And whenever men and women straighten their backs up, they are going somewhere, because a man can't ride your back unless it has been. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1963 when the black people of Birmingham, Alabama aroused the conscience of this nation and brought into being the Civil Rights Bill. If I'd sneezed, I wouldn't have had a chance later that year in August to try to tell America about a dream that I'd had. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been down in Selma, Alabama to see the great movement there. If I'd sneezed, I wouldn't have been in Memphis to see a community rally around those brothers and sisters who are suffering. Oh, I tell you, I'm just so happy. God, I'm happy I didn't sneeze. Oh, and they were telling me, now it doesn't matter now. I left Atlanta this morning. As we got started on the plane, there were 6 of us. The pilot said over the public address system, we are sorry for the delay, but we have Dr. Martin Luther King on the plane. And to be sure that all the bags were checked and to be sure that nothing would go wrong on the plane, we had to check out everything carefully. We've had the plane protected and guarded all night. Oh, but then I got into Memphis. Some began to say the threats or talk about the threats that were out. What would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers? Oh, well, I tell you, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. Oh, but it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. Oh, and I don't mind, like anybody, I'd like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I come to tell you, I may not get there with you, but I want you to know on tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He's trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He's loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. God bless you.
My Lord. Let's bless the Lord one more time.